Good morning and welcome to Sarah Centineo, legislative candidate from District 45. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, Volunteer State President, and Advocacy Lead Volunteers Joyce Beck and Mike Barwig. Sarah, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. Sarah, if you want to start us off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign in maybe 5 minutes or less, that would be great. And once we've completed your opening, we'll move into the questions. Go ahead, Sarah.
Wonderful. I have lived here in Bellevue in District 45. I live right over by Fontenelle Forest. For the Bellevue residents that will be watching, it's a beautiful area of the city. We've lived here for just about 20 years. We moved here when my oldest son, was just 1, and he turns 21 today, so it's his birthday. And we also have an 18-year-old son. Both of our sons are proud graduates of Bellevue West High School. They went to Bellevue Public Schools. I grew up in Council Bluffs, Iowa. My first degree was in nursing. I have my BSN from the University of Iowa. And then in 2008, when my kids were 5 and 2.5, I went back to school full time and I went to law school at Creighton. I graduated with my JD in 2011. And since then, I've worked mostly on medical malpractice law. And I also do additional education of nurses and medical students about medical negligence. And then I also do a lot of education to lawyers about how medicine works. So I kind of work in both of those arenas. Advocacy has always been a huge part of my life. As a nurse, I worked in the pediatric and neonatal intensive care units at Children's Hospital for altogether about 16 years. During that time, I took care of the most vulnerable and the sickest children in the metro area. Through that experience is really just reinforced my advocacy for healthcare access for everyone. It's a really big deal. It affects entire families. We in medicine, we're able to support people when they're more ill, children, adults, and we need to have communities that can support them so they can have the most meaningful recovery for their medical stuff. And obviously, along with all of those other things, there's stresses on the family and mental health stresses that come along with those things. And I think that there are definitely things that we can do on a legislative side that can support people so that they're as successful as they can be. As far as my campaign is concerned, we're doing great. Super excited about our very positive, very joyous campaign and getting out there and advocating for healthcare access, public education, keeping tax dollars in public services, and really advocating for everyday Nebraskans as a whole. In my district, in particular for this demographic, that my average voter is 53, I think, and I'm 50 years old this year too. And my neighborhood is one of the oldest neighborhoods on the Bellevue Boulevard. And I am very, very aware of the struggles that our population over 50 face. And I think there are definitely things we can do to help that population. So I think I tucked in under 5 minutes as assigned. So
Perfect, Sarah. Thank you so much. We'll move on here now to the question portion. We have provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50-plus in Nebraska. Again, these are issues of importance that we're hearing from our members. We are looking to allot 5 minutes for each question, and I know they're pretty jam-packed. But we'll begin with question 1, which is on health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. And Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Good morning, Sarah. You and I have a lot in common. I have been in healthcare for 50 years. I started out as a nurse also, and then became a hospital CEO. And unfortunately, I do know about medical malpractice as well. So it's nice to see a fellow nurse on board here. So welcome, and I'm so glad to be one to ask you this question. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say that staying in their homes as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services, as well as area agency on agings, become important assets to caregivers as they care for loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of their loved ones, but it also provides relief for an already strained long-term care industry. So here's my questions for you, Sarah. What would you do to protect and expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention as a significant workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And then the second question is, what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Yeah, so only 5 minutes. That's a lot. Because I could talk about this subject for a very long time from personal experience and professional experience, because I do feel like I have a very strong education and experience in this particular subject. As far as workforce retention is, but because I know, like my dad had Alzheimer's. He passed away at 75, not from Alzheimer's, but from multiple myeloma. And it was during COVID. It was a very difficult time for us. Because of my unique background, I often am tapped as the medical power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney. So I just get lots of questions about all of those kinds of things. Continuity of care in the home is really difficult. I did do home health care at the very beginning of my career, and it is a difficult thing to maintain. So what we have to look at are the same things we look at in a lot of these professions, including, and I think of like school aides and paras, nurses aides, all of these kind of and I say lower level only because they're lower paid, but they're just equally as important as the nurse and physician. But if we don't pay livable wages or provide some kind of stipend or some kind of incentive, housing allowance, childcare, right? That's a big one too. You can't be spending more money to work than you do make when you're working. So there are things that we can do to support those people who are working and doing those jobs, which actually helps our economy because it takes the burden off of the sandwich generations that are taking care of their kids and their parents. So economically, and the studies all play out that it's very important and very feasible. And I think it's really important to keep people aging in home. Most people want it. Some older people desperately want it. I've had lots of conversations with people who've struggled to get services in the home and it's unsafe for them. And that's a long discussion about how, those difficult discussions, but those are also things that, sorry, this is a little off topic, but even pre-planning and talking about what your goals for your older loved ones are. What do they want their lives to look like? Are there limits to what in-home care looks like for them? Because there are limits to services that can be provided. And having those very straightforward conversations before it gets to a time of crisis is really important. So there's a lot, and I actually looked up the Nebraska Department on the Aging to try to find what services they offer, and I was a little disappointed at how difficult it was to kind of find anything that was available. So I'm not sure of all of the state all of the things that the state would offer, but I think that there's definitely problems with access to that information and making sure that what they have listed on their website are actually things that are offered. Because as we know, there's been state staffing that has been decreased. And if we're seeing decreases in staffing for the Nebraska Department of the Aging, social services, mental health care, that affects all of the ability for people to age in home. And it's not just people who are older, over 50, but even people, and certainly people with different abilities that want to stay in their home and don't want to have to go somewhere else to get the services that they need, because we can do a better job. And I am trying very desperately not to talk over time because I know there's more questions, but I hope that kind of answers, at least gives you an idea of how I approach those issues.
Thank you, Sarah.
Perfect, Sarah. Thank you. And yes, they're very jam-packed questions and we don't give you much time, but again, thank you for your comments on the surface of what you're looking at and where you would go with that. Question number 2 comes from Mike Barwig, and it's addressing consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. Go ahead, Mike.
Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams such as wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. With that in mind, our question for you is, consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices, and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? In other words, would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices, enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund, or implementation of preventive or corrective measures to assist in combating owner-seller housing impersonation fraud?
Yeah, so there I would absolutely, support a victim impact fund. I think that there are enough merchants that make money off of people that even taking a percentage or a small percentage of, a dedicated stream would do that. For example, I will tell you, in like medical negligence work, we have a fund set aside that the state has, that sits on, that earns interest, and that's a fund that, so that the hospitals and providers are not supposed to have to pay out of pocket. And that's more complicated because it's really insurance companies that benefit, but that's a different story. But I think that there is definitely a way to do that, because if we do start a fund and then you use the interest, that can become self-sustaining pretty quickly, even at more nominal investments going down the line, right? Because you can earn money. I also think that there's absolutely room for enforcement or penalty phase, especially on those merchants. The merchants, it is somehow, I feel like they are not taking their part of the responsibility for this. They have the ability to put safeguards in there that the consumers do not. We are not going to convince my parents, my grandparents, to not be the lovely, wonderful, giving people that they are. And we're not going to have them learn how to do a QR code or to take screenshots or do all of these things. For the most part, it's hard. Technology gets frustrating. It's harder as you get older. For some people, it's more than others. So I don't think that the onus should be on the consumer nor on the consumer's family, because I also think that that is really passing the buck. These are the people who are making money on these things. These are the people that absolutely have the ability to provide some safeguards to make it harder for people to perpetrate the fraud. Right now, there's no financial incentive for them to do this. So it costs them money. So there needs to be either they agree to put these barriers up and pay for that, or there's penalties and we force the barriers on them. I think there's room for discussions with merchants, and I'm not always the most probably the most popular with the business community, because I think that they have more responsibility towards their consumers, but I think that is a line I'm definitely willing to fight for. So did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Sarah, thank you very much for your explanation and your answer to that. Our last question then, we're going to switch over to more of our livable community side of things, is it with housing and helping people stay in their homes and communities. And Susan DeCamp is going to take that. So go ahead, Susan.
Good morning, Sarah, and happy birthday to your son today. Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most of them want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus they're being pushed out of communities and homes that they have lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options such as accessory dwelling units, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And finally, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to that tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
So from the Homestead Exemption Act, I was actually looking at the parameters of that to seeing where we could expand it. Because I think that, that of course we always talk about property taxes in Nebraska. And as a person who's passionate about public schools, the public school funding, public schools get 60% of your property taxes. There's a whole issue with state aid that goes into that. But how do we make sure that that older people and people of limited means, or people who, gosh forbid, have a medical crisis, don't lose their homes because of all of the property tax issue. So we need to provide some allowances for people who are struggling so they don't lose their homes. The homes that are lost are not, it's not like buying a new pair of shoes. You can't go out and get something that's the same thing. It's hard to rebuild that capital. It's hard to rebuild that investment. It's also part of intergenerational wealth. I see that a lot in the neighborhood where I live. Some of the families I live around have been there for decades and decades. Some of them are the only families that have ever lived in those houses. And that's a real source of pride for people. And it really actually, it makes a difference in the community, and it grows our community, and it provides strong roots for our community and a lot of sense of community pride. So if people want to stay in their homes, we need to do the things to keep them there. I look at property taxes, but I think the thing that people aren't talking about a lot is insurance prices. Homeowners insurance is all through the roof, literally. Like we have an out of control insurance agent
We do.
policies. It's nuts. My homeowner insurance is dropping me for a hail claim. Act of God. And it is, and it's just very frustrating, right? One of the through lines of my campaign and the way I really look at life is, how do I reduce barriers to success? If success looks different for different people. If success is staying in your home and aging in place, what are the barriers to that success? Is it property taxes? Is it insurance? Is it home maintenance? Is it getting the care that you need? All of those things are probably barriers to success, different varying levels for different people. But how do we as a society, how do we as good neighbors, how do we as state legislators support people to be as successful as they can at all stages of life? Just because you're over 50 doesn't mean that you lose your value or you lose your worth. I've always felt that, and it's certainly true in the campaign, in the voting world. The most active voting segment is that. So you guys have a lot of power. I'm over 50 now. There's a lot of voting power there, and we need people that understand and that are willing to fight for the people that need the help. So sorry, was there another? I've carved off a few because I went off on a tangent and I don't think I answered that whole question.
No, that's fine. That was mostly homestead exemption, but we were wondering maybe what your thoughts would be on other types of housing being allowed, such as the accessory dwelling units, manufactured homes, those types of things.
Yeah, so zoning laws are surprisingly onerous to addition of, like, and I'm going to call it flexible housing.
Okay.
Because I have young ones at home. They need some flexible housing options too. These flexible housing options work for all generations of a family, and maybe my kids want to kick me out and then I want the flexible housing out, so so I think that really recruiting and doing some investment on the state level of how do we make this work? You know, how do we do that? And that keeps, we talk a lot about workforce development. We need the care providers, the people who are doing the work that can go in the home and take care of people that need help, or even just, you know, whatever that looks like. So all of that flexible housing option helps all of those things. So I am a big proponent of exploring and expanding those abilities. We have to be realistic with real estate developers because they are looking at their bottom line, which is how much money they can earn. They don't earn money from multi-generational dwellings. They don't earn as much money because if they force people to live separately, that's more, you know, we have to look at that realistically. So uh you know, and having hard conversations with people who own a lot of land or have a lot of money or do all of that is not always easy for people. Um, I'm totally okay with that because I don't think anybody's more important than anyone else. Because my goal, once again, is what's the goal? The goal is to to reduce barriers to success. That's really the goal. So.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, for your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Sarah. And I appreciate your comment about just because you're over 50, and we kind of always say that, you know, our older generations are assets, not liabilities. And I think you said that very well in what you were saying. So thank you for your comments on that. We are coming now to the end of our time already. We would ask, you know, we have about 3 to 5 minutes left. Would you take a few minutes to talk about, and you kind of already did this, but any priorities you have for serving in the legislature, or any final comments that you'd like to provide to close our interview out?
Yeah, I think that the thing that really has struck me. So this is I've been on the school board in Bellevue for 8 years. So I've been through 2 election cycles. So I'm not new to election cycles. Um, and so I've been running in a race every 4 years since 2016. And I would say the thing that is certain, of course, this is different for me, but it's a logical leadership position for me because of my experience, my education, and I think that the way that I have the ability to advocate for a lot of different people. Um, but I just want to make politics a little bit boring again. I'm really tired of the culture wars. I'm really tired of not acting like adults in the room. I really want people just to make common sense, intentional decisions and legislation so that we can help people and not do the culture war baloney. And it's exhausting. It's a bad example for our kids. It's bad example for all people. And it's so unproductive. So that's what I really want. I really want to make a real difference for Nebraskans so that we all can do better. And fighting these culture wars and this bickering and all of the hateful language is just too much. It's too much.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Sarah, for taking the time to visit with us today. We wish you the best with your campaign, and thank you for meeting with AARP today.
Yeah.
Take care.
Great. Lovely. Take care.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.